Okay, in this video I want to go over the midterm responses and to help you think about how to do well on a assignment like this, and then also how it configures into the class itself. So you were studying a case study and now I'm studying you as a case study, so this is kind of us thinking about education around legal thinking. So I've divided this into a few categories. So the easiest thing to give you responses or feedback on is that very few people used any course materials at all. So that's always a bad sign. And for those of you who didn't reference course materials, it was very obvious you were more likely copying and pasting things from the internet. And as I start to see 10, 15 of the same responses, then it becomes super obvious that that's what you're doing. And so the problem with those answers is that they're completely out of context and they're not referring to the materials that we've been studying this point, so they tend not to make any sense. I doubt they make sense to you either, but you're looking for a few buzzwords, I think, and then you put those answers in. And so, the easiest thing you can do then is to use course materials. A couple students have asked me, how do you do this? And this is a challenge, I think, for two reasons. One is a lot of your classes, they're at the bottom here of Bloom's taxonomy, where they're only asking you to remember things. So when you get into a harder class or an upper level class like this class, and if you transfer to the four-year college, you really haven't practiced this enough to do applying very well. And so in a low stakes, meaning this isn't a huge part of your grade assignment in the fourth week, you get to practice and to learn maybe how to do this better than what you've been doing. The simplest thing is what I'll show you some examples of in a second, but this really comes down to how well you're taking notes. And so when you're doing your readings, you should, of course, I think a lot of you automatically do kind of main point, what's the main point of the reading. I'm not going to tell you not to do that. I'm not sure how helpful it is, honestly, but if it works for you, you should do it. But that's the remembering phase, right? That's the lowest level. It doesn't mean that you understand what the main point means or what its context is. And so you'll want to also in your notes try to rephrase it, try to paraphrase it, try to put that in more into a meaning that makes sense to you. And that's almost, it's almost always useful to use an example from everyday life when you're doing that. And then applying it is meaning you understand the concept and now you're applying it to a new situation. So this is where tables and charts are really helpful. Basically, you're seeing where does this concept apply and where does it not apply? How is it different or similar to other concepts? And so this is, again, all about how you take notes. The better notes you take, the easier it is for you to be able to apply. Once you're able to apply concepts to new situations, then you kind of get at the highest level of higher level thinking, where you're analyzing and evaluating and creating concepts. This gets a little bit harder then if you haven't understood or applied the social construction of reality, which is something you really should have learned in your sociology classes. And then this how the system works, which is there's a few classes you would have taken that give you the pieces of the system, and then you would have applied those new pieces. So when you blame individuals instead of the system, you're showing me you don't understand the system, right? The criminal justice system, the legal system, or the political system, because you're not able to apply your understanding of the system and its bias and how it applies to individuals, as opposed to you keep kind of talking about society or life as if individuals make 100% of their own decisions all the time without any influence at all from anybody else. And so this is a quote-unquote natural way of thinking. This is how children think, right? They look at the motives of their parents when they get food or don't get food. They don't necessarily understand the issues of how to make a meal, how much money you need to make in order to go to the grocery store. You're not looking at all the systemic issues that go into making a meal for the day. You're just simply looking at it like, well, mom didn't make me a meal at such and such time, or dad refuses to feed me at 4:30 instead of 5:15. So again, that's something that is common. We do that all the time, But in a college class, you're looking at something more systemic. And in a class like legal system or constitutional law or your criminal justice system classes, you're not looking at individuals. And so if you tended to blame individuals or put all the emphasis on the individual, then you tended not to get a very good grade. The hardest, which I didn't grade very harshly on, was you just weren't used to using intersectional analysis, and so you struggled with it. So for those of you who tried and you did okay, I kind of bumped up your grade. But many of you just really didn't try at all. And so again, that shows me that you don't understand the intersections of race, gender, and class as injustices, which again, if you don't understand the system, then you're going to tend to focus on individuals, and then you're missing kind of the first 4 weeks of this class, basically. It hasn't sunken in yet. So part of this assessment process is to bring this to your attention, so you kind of say, oh, I see now, I need to change the way I'm thinking in order to learn the concepts in the class and not just memorize some key terms. So this is two theories that come in as threshold concepts, which is many educators use this whether they know it or not. But we're really teaching you a handful of concepts in a class, and so we're measuring whether you really understand that. So another professor that I was talking to, she's really wants you to understand the totality of circumstances test in the Supreme Court. And what you have to think about then is totality. That's a phrase that's borrowed from mathematics, and so you really have to understand the concept of probabilities to understand why the court would use a test like that in cases particularly where the evidence isn't so well defined in a case. Maybe it's from a anonymous tip, or maybe it's from a very prejudicial eyewitness, or maybe the police messed up the chain of custody, and so you have to kind of understand math to see why there's not a one way or not of doing something, that there's probabilities, that there's a big picture with lots of pieces. And so threshold concepts is really like this core thing that we're trying to get you to understand, and then there's these little pieces around it that will help you kind of make sense of that concept. So in this class, that concept is called malleability, which is law is changeable, right? It's not one thing. So many of you came into this class thinking as law is one thing. I looked it up on the internet, and the internet told me it's a system of rules, right? But you didn't understand what a system was, and neither did the internet when it was constructing that sentence. Or it's a supreme command, right? But again, you don't understand what the concept of supreme command is. And so law is not one thing, is the simplest way, but it's also changeable, right? It meets the needs of the social context. And so that's what we mean by a system, right? Systems respond and adapt to the individuals in the system. They also influence the individuals, and that's where legality comes in. So your ideas about what you think law are, that's better called legality. And that's based on stories that you have told yourself and you've heard about law, and also your own experiences. And so you want to start thinking about this as more as a fluid changing system that influences people and is also influenced by people. As you start to engage with these new concepts, and then you start to learn new skills like applying as opposed to just remembering things, this will slowly change your perspective. Some of you, it will go very quickly. You'll suddenly have an aha moment. I was in a class this last week, and a student had an aha moment right in front of me, right? And so sometimes it can just strike like lightning. For others of you, this is going to be more like a long, painful session at the gym, right? You're trying to learn a new way because you've really just been kind of under this habit system. You haven't been examining these concepts. You've been taking them for granted. You've only been focusing on remembering. Mea culpa, maybe you were actually copying and pasting answers from the internet and getting away with it in your other classes, and so now suddenly you're being asked to think, and so this is going to be a hard thing for you, so it might take you some time. So self-reflection is key here. You have to think about, how have I been thinking about law? How have I been thinking about systems? How do I get out of the habit of blaming individuals and start to look at how a system adds costs and benefits? And that's really hard to grade. And so I try to be fair. I try to be generous. So that's why you don't get a F on every assignment, right? Like you're getting a variety of grades. I also try to use the rubric so that you can kind of see where you're at. So the green answer over here, does a good job of critical analysis. It makes reference to the course readings. It's using complete sentences. It shows me that they're able to use the concepts. It's referring to race, class, and gender, and then it's offering new ideas, right, to this idea. And I think that really comes out when the student makes the observation that even though many of you pointed out that not giving the voucher or accepting the voucher is illegal, but it happens all the time. And so just because something is illegal doesn't mean that people don't do it. Jaywalking, for example, right? And so this person, put this contradiction out there. And then in separate answers, they talked more about race, class, and gender, but on this answer, they showed that that's what was, the system was causing this discrimination, not an individual. Whereas, an answer that's getting better, right? It's moving from a not a great answer to a getting better answer, is that it's using this understanding. It shows that, but it's broad and overgeneralized, that people make up excuses, so that's you're still focusing on the individual as opposed to the system. And it's really putting the burden on the person here. So it's saying that people of color have it harder to find a house, right? As if that's kind of an accident, that's not like a system intended thing. And so it's not specific, it's kind of just referring to discrimination very generally. This shows me a student that's starting to think about these concepts and that's moving through them, but that you haven't quite got to the level of application yet. So the big concept that's standing in the way is this concept of hegemony. And it's a very familiar concept to legal scholars, but obviously, right, if you haven't been spending a lot of time thinking about this, then this is going to be new to you. So the kind of simplest way I want to try to explain it, which kind of explains why this is hard for you to see the system as opposed to continuing to blame individuals as if the system were fair, is that working class people in our brains were split between one, an ideology that's imposed upon us, meaning it's told to us, it's in the media, we want to believe it's true, and then our own common sense based on our experience. So we know the system is not fair. We have many, many examples from our daily life telling us that the system isn't fair. We even have some parents who say things like life isn't fair, but what they mean is the system's not fair. They don't mean life. But we continue and struggle to look for fairness anyway, and this is the split between our brains, is we want to see fairness, right, because it's told to us that it exists, and so we want to find examples of it. So I pulled out just something I saw yesterday on Instagram, which is very ironic and funny, but I noticed that lots and lots of people in the comments didn't understand the irony that this person was putting forward. So they said, just realized got scammed by hundreds of talented, forward-thinking, world-class artists by buying their beautiful NFTs. And I don't want to pick on anybody right now, but cryptocurrency and NFTs aren't protected under intellectual property rights law. And so we have this saying in law called caveat emptor, which is buyer beware, meaning like you don't have rights if you do something that is unprotected by law. And so getting scammed here is kind of the funny thing, because this is a person who sells NFTs to people and has made a bunch of money because they bought them from him, thinking that those things would then be worth money. But they're only, something is only worth money if someone else is dumb enough to buy it from you. And so that's the only way something gains value, right? Nothing has value in and of itself, right? There's a few exceptions to that rule, right? Like gold has value because of its use in electronics and dental equipment and things like that. But, so natural earth minerals have value in themselves because we use them so often. But, manufactured products, right, only have value if somebody else is going to buy it. If you don't believe me, go to a 99-cent store in the next week and look around at all the useless garbage that nonetheless somebody thinks is a treasure and they pay money for. This is the challenge here, though, is that the hegemony tells us that you have rights. You believe that if you were wronged, if somebody violates your rights, that if they steal from you, or if they scam you, then you have a right to go after them. But in reality, that only applies to certain situations. It's not universal. And so this is that conflict in our brains that says, wow, this system is rigged, we know it. But then when something bad happens to us, we say, oh, we want our rights, we want fairness, right? Even though we just knew that the system wasn't, and that people get away with this kind of stuff all the time. The other issue here is that, so this ideology, the belief system that gets people to believe in this, benefits those in the ruling classes, the elites, the ones who are running these websites. And so they're not going to go against it, and they're not going to look out for your interests, and neither is the legal system. Because again, going back to this ancient Latin phrase, buyer beware, caveat emptor, there's an assumption that you're going to know your rights and that you're going to look up the law and that you're going to be smart when you make purchases. Of course, we all know that that's not realistic. People think, the carnival wouldn't exist, the circus wouldn't exist, but for the fact that people will spend money on things they shouldn't. Same thing with the casino. So the other way to think about this then is, here are 3 answers that kind of build up, right? So you've got this student who's struggling. They're referring to norms and stereotypes as kind of, broad, but then they're starting to try to narrow in with the examples from the reading, but they don't use any examples from our course materials, right? And so what they kind of get out of this is that they're trying to make sense of the reading, and so they're still trying to use this like fairness idea as if the system was fair. And so if I believe the system is fair, then I want the individual, I want X to change, right? Because I think there's something X can do. If they just work harder, if they just work smarter, if they just figure out a trick, then they're going to be able to beat the system. And so when we go into the narratives, this is seeing law as a game. I'm with the law and it will work for me, and it's really about who plays the game best. That's obviously not a great answer, right? It's better than speaking about law as universal and equal for all, but it's still putting the burden on the individual when the system is the thing that really needs to be changed. Now, the other one, this comes out, this is a more narrower answer here of looking at, now the person is saying it's not just the individual, it's how they behave. And so how they're being perceived, and that perception of being different is what justifies the discrimination against exclusion. That's a much, that's getting clearer and clearer. This student is now working through, and they're almost to the issue of applying, right? They're starting to show that they understand, but they're still focused on the behavior of X, and they're kind of discounting other people's behavior as almost as if that's the right behavior, that people are supposed to be using stereotypes, that they're supposed to be using justifications to discrimination. So the third answer is the one that really, actually, this is nearly a perfect answer, is that understanding that the system was designed to benefit people who are racist, right? That was the whole point. So the system works perfectly when X doesn't get a housing voucher, because that's how it was designed. It would be strange if it didn't work this way, because the system is designed to do that. And so it's all based on people who already have property and who benefit from the hegemony. Those who are outside of that system are always going to be on a fool's errand if they're trying to win and play the game within that system. They might get a temporary win, but overall the system is still going to try to force them out. And so, as the student very clearly understands, the Constitution needs to be rewritten. And so that's if you want the system to be different, right? If you don't want the system to be different, then you don't rewrite the system. But if you want it to be different, then you have to change the rules that govern the system. And so this shows me that the student can apply the understanding from the first 4 weeks, and even used one of the authors of the Constitution to show their reasoning. The kind of other thing that you want to think about then is, if you're still wondering, like, okay, why does this matter? I want you to look at your answers about what X should do. And they vary, right, as you can see. But they tend towards the hegemony, right? That X needs to change. In fact, one student said, and I don't disagree, right? It's like, this is hard to give somebody advice in this system, but they're asking them to change. Don't be yourself, be somebody else, and so you can get benefits from the system. Unfortunately, as people of color know, you can't change your skin complexion. And so while you can change certain behaviors, you can't change other characteristics within a system that's biased against you. And so again, like, even though some of you were analyzing the fact pattern, once I open it up to be like back to everyday life, your common sense and hegemony are clashing with each other. You still want to believe in a system that's fair, you still want to believe in working hard, even though you just showed me that it's not, and it's discriminating, and it's a whole system that's built to be against people like X. And so I just wanted to kind of show you all these different proposals that you put out there, and only a couple of them are talking about changing the system itself. Everyone else is really focused on X. You're just going to have to either change or just basically do nothing. So in conclusion, I just want to point out that in a legal class, after 4 weeks of talking and thinking about the law, you didn't see law or the courts as a way to change the injustice. So nobody thought that X should file a constitutional claim in court and take the landlord to court. Lots of you saw what was going on as illegal, but you didn't really see the law as being able to do anything about that illegal activity. Now, a lot of that is because you were all mostly looking to individual change, meaning you thought X had to change and not the system, and that's complicated, but right, you want to start thinking about the system changing, not individuals adapting to a broken system. So I just have to make these 2 points, is that on the one hand you're saying you believe the system is fair since you're thinking it doesn't need to be changed, but on the other hand you were saying it wasn't fair, right? So here's the contradiction that hegemony is really showing here, is that on the one hand you're buying the story that elites have told you, that the system is fair and you just have to work hard and one day you'll be an elite too. On the other hand, from your everyday common sense experience, you're saying the system is not fair. And so this is how our brains are trying to make sense of this contradiction. And so I just gave a couple cartoons here to show it again in corporate legal kind of language, right? Is that really when you start thinking about it, especially like the First Amendment, I'm sure you can find examples of everyday people trying to use the First Amendment, but once you get into the legal history and once you really start analyzing and getting deep into the logic of it, the First Amendment is not for regular people, it's for corporations, and it always was intended to be for corporations. And so that's why a case like Citizens United, where corporations have the right to spend money on campaigns, whereas you and I can only spend like $2,500 on a campaign. The system was designed for elites. It was designed for wealthy people. And even when a president, right, is pushing through a policy like healthcare policy that he thinks and others believe is the right thing to do, and that it's a right versus wrong, it's a fair thing. When you believe the system is fair, here comes the Supreme Court to remind you, no, this is actually, there's this legal case, Marbury versus Madison, that says the courts get to decide what is right and what is legal. And so again, those decisions benefit the elites and benefit the corporations. They're not, there's no system, the courts don't respond to the majority votes principle that lots of students believe in. And so again, right, the system was designed a certain way, and there's lots of good history books that you can read about why the people who designed that system wanted to discriminate against people. They were very blunt and obvious about it. As you saw, James Madison told you exactly why he thinks that people should be discriminated against. Now you just have this mixture of arguments that tend to not be so honest, right? They tend to use nice language to try to hide their true intentions of why they want to discriminate. And they don't want to come out and say we're trying to treat people differently. And so these are the things that have to wrestle around in your brain as contradictions when you're trying to confront things that you might have believed or thought about without examining them. And now here in this class you're getting evidence that contradicts that, and so you have to start making sense of that. And again, if you believe the system is not fair from your common sense experience, take that, right? Build on that. If you think the system is fair, we have to talk, right? Because there's just too many examples of it not being fair. And then from my own knowledge, right, of being a legal scholar, it was never designed to be fair. So if you think it is fair, you're kind of defying the design and you're defying all of the evidence in reality. And so you're really just kind of believing a story, and there must be good reasons for you to do that if you're defying all of the logic and the evidence otherwise. And so, usually those reasons involve it's what I was told, or it's what I need to believe in order to get through the social system I'm in right now. And so that's kind of that advice the student gave about X needs to change, not the system. But in this class you get to look at the system, and so you can think about changes that might not be realistic, right? They might not be things that are going to happen tomorrow, but it doesn't make them not true, right? I mean, if you come up with a good change, then that's what you should be thinking about. So I hope that this was helpful. again, if you want to get better about this kind of exam or these kind of assignments, there's two kind of real hard rules. One is you have to take better notes, and you have to be much more organized in going from main point to, well, what was the purpose of that reading, and then pulling out some examples that you can then paraphrase and apply to new situations. The second thing is, I'm torn on this, to be honest. I mean, on the one hand, it's okay to look things up online, right? It's almost like a good habit, right, in a way. Curiosity, you want to kind of, what does this thing mean? But I'm not going to ask you something that doesn't have something to do with the readings and activities we're doing. So if you don't understand the question, that's the time when you're supposed to email me, and students do, and I write them back, and I try to be honest, right? Sometimes I can answer a question, and sometimes I have to say, well, that's the exam question, right? So you have to try your best. But, don't see this as a zero-sum winner-take-all game, this class, right? This is, if you don't understand something, that's okay. That's what you're here for. You're trying to understand it. The wrong thing to do is to copy and paste from a website that probably has nothing to do with our class, but you think you might be covering your bases, and God forbid it's because some other professor gave you an A for doing that. I don't want to get into all the reasons why that's cheating and why we're supposed to report you and kick you out of college, because I'm just not going to do that. I will bring it to your attention and we'll talk about it, but it's really going to be explaining why you're not doing well in this class, is because I'm asking you to think and to use your brain and to apply knowledge kind of each week and build it up, build it up, build it up. So you should be struggling with these contradictions because, right, you had different ideas and now you're being challenged to think beyond those ideas, or as some students say, think out of the box. So that's where we're at. The good news is we're not quite to the halfway point, so we have lots of work yet to do, and so you can get better and better and better. But the main thing is to now think of law as changeable, and that legality is the story you tell yourself and that you've been told, and you want to compare that to your actual experience.